vanished without a trace.
3 generations of one family.
Chohan's are now at the centre of a major police hunt.
Why would anybody want to simply walk away and leave it all behind?
Omkar Varma had always been close to his younger sister Nancy. When she gave birth to her second son, Ravindra, Omkar was overjoyed and couldn't wait to be part of his sister's happiness. But just a few days later, when he wasn't able to get in touch with Nancy, he knew something was wrong. When he reached her home, the condition of the house deepened his fears, because it wasn't just Nancy, but her entire family that had suddenly disappeared without a trace. So let's learn more about today's case, which revolves around the Chohan family. Amarjeet Chohan, also known as Anil, lived in West London with his wife and one child. Though there was a 21-year age gap between them, their love for each other was just as big. Amarjeet ran a successful fruit import-export business called Seba Freight, which helped sustain their household. Being a successful businessman meant he was always busy, but no matter how hectic his schedule was, Amarjeet always made it a point to keep Nancy informed about everything. He regularly sent her voice notes in Punjabi, saying things like, "I'll be late today," or "I have work," or "There's something coming up next week." Nancy admired and was proud of her husband, both his past and present. However, she always hoped Amarjeet would take early retirement so they could return to India. One of the main reasons for that was her belief that India offered a better education for children than the UK. She also wanted to raise her kids in her homeland. This desire to go back to India grew stronger after the birth of their second son, Ravindra. With Amarjeet deeply involved in business and no relatives in London to help her, Nancy had to raise her kids on her own. Though Amarjeet supported her, most of the parenting responsibilities fell on Nancy's shoulders. To ease the burden, Nancy called her mother, Sharanjeet Kaur, to London to live with her and help out. After Ravindra's birth, everyone was extremely happy for Nancy. Not only was she the youngest daughter in the family, but her marriage, which many doubted due to the large age gap, was thriving. Seeing her daughter happy with her husband and kids in London made Sharanjeet Kaur proud. She often told her son, Omkar Varma, how happy his sister was. Omkar lived far away in New Zealand, but frequently spoke to Nancy on the phone. She always spoke highly of Amarjeet, and her voice always carried genuine happiness. Still, Omkar wanted to see his sister and brother-in-law together with his own eyes to be fully convinced. That moment was coming soon, because Omkar was planning to visit London to meet Nancy and his nephew. On February 14, 2003, Omkar had a normal phone call with Nancy. But unlike every other time, her voice didn't sound joyful. It sounded worried. Nancy told him that Amarjeet hadn't come home since the previous day, and his phone was switched off. When she called Seba Freight, the employees told her Amarjeet had left for an urgent meeting in the Netherlands. Nancy immediately felt something was off, because Amarjeet's passport was with the UK government, so how could he go to the Netherlands without it? Her worry deepened when she received a voicemail from Amarjeet. Although it was his voice, the message was in English, and if you remember, Amarjeet always sent voice notes in Punjabi. Even though the message sounded innocent and normal, this small detail made Nancy suspicious that something was wrong. Still, Omkar tried to calm her down, saying she might be overthinking it, that it was just a minor thing and Amarjeet would return home safely. After that, Omkar hung up the phone. Unfortunately, that was the last time he would ever hear his younger sister Nancy's voice. The very next day after that phone call, and just 2 days after Amarjeet supposedly left for the Netherlands, the entire Chohan family, Nancy, her sons Ravindra and Devendra, and her mother Sharanjeet Kaur, disappeared from their London home. They told no one. They left behind no letter. The entire family vanished in a thin air. As sudden as that sounds, it was just as sudden in real life. No one saw it coming. A few days after their disappearance, a man came to the Seba Freight office carrying some documents. He showed the employees paperwork stating that Amarjeet Chohan had left the UK with his family and transferred ownership of Seba Freight to someone else. At the bottom of the document were Amarjeet's signatures. The new owner of the company was listed as Kenneth Reagan, a former employee of Seba Freight and a close friend of Amarjeet. Kenneth Reagan had applied for a job at Seba Freight in July 2002. But Reagan had a hard time finding work because he had just been released from prison and no one trusted him because of his criminal record. Kenneth Reagan was struggling to find a job. No one was hiring him. But when he came to Amarjeet's company, Amarjeet was empathetic toward him. Why? Because Amarjeet himself had once been to prison for tax evasion. So he kind of understood what Reagan must have been going through. After being released from jail, Kenneth Reagan wanted to start a new life, to begin a new chapter. Amarjeet genuinely wanted to help him with that, so he decided to hire someone fresh out of prison and give him a second chance. Amarjeet completely trusted Reagan. One day, Reagan told Amarjeet that he knew some investors who were interested in buying Seba Freight, and they were willing to pay £3 million for it. Amarjeet recalled what Nancy had often said, that he should take early retirement so they could go back to India. Amarjeet felt like the opportunity had come knocking at his door, so he agreed to meet with these so-called investors. That meeting was scheduled for February 13, 2003. Reagan and Amarjeet left to meet the investors, and that was the last time anyone saw Amarjeet alive. At that point, Amarjeet had disappeared, something that should have alerted the police, but didn't. Why? First, because Amarjeet had a criminal history due to tax evasion, which made the police less responsive. Second, in foreign countries like the UK, it's not uncommon for immigrant families to suddenly disappear, often simply returning to their home countries without telling anyone. So the authorities didn't act urgently. And remember, disappearing voluntarily is not a crime. So when employees at Seba Freight reported that Amarjeet and his entire family had vanished, the police didn't take the matter very seriously. It wasn't until Nancy's brother Omkar Varma arrived in London and began persistently pressuring the police that they finally began an investigation, starting with a visit to Amarjeet's home. What they found there made it immediately clear. This case was far more twisted than it appeared. When police entered the Chohan family's home, everything was left exactly as it had been. Food was still on the table. Clothes were in the washing machine. The fridge was full. The kids' toys were scattered across the floor. It was like the entire family had left without taking a single item, as if they didn't even plan to go anywhere. A few baby items, toys, and feeding bottles were still inside. Even their passports were left behind. Omkar Varma, Nancy's brother who had flown in from New Zealand to help with the search, said, "Hearing nothing at all is extremely unusual and out of character. I'm very worried. I need to know whether they are safe. I'm deeply concerned about their safety." Even Charanjit Kaur's return ticket to India and her holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib, were still at the house. And Charanjit could forget a wallet or a document, but she would never leave behind her holy book. My mom's prayer book was there inside the house. That was something strange because my mom always carried it with her. This all clearly indicated that the Chohan family didn't just vanish. They didn't disappear by choice. By this point, over a month had passed since anyone had heard from the family. No contact with relatives in India. No activity in their bank accounts. It was as if the entire family had vanished from the face of the earth. Until April 22, 2003. On that day, a father and son were out boating, fishing at sea, when they noticed something floating in the water. By the time the police arrived, they had identified it. It was a body. And after identification, it was confirmed. The body was Amarjeet's. The condition of the body made it clear that someone had murdered him and dumped his corpse in the sea. His mouth had been taped, his hands tied, and he had a severe head injury. Seeing Amarjeet's body in such a state made the police realize something chilling. If they want to find the rest of the Chohan family alive, they had to act fast. But sadly, it was already too late. In July 2003, Nancy's body was recovered from the sea. In November 2003, Charanjit Kaur's body was also found. By then, police had started losing hope. They no longer believed the two young children would be found alive. Meanwhile, at Seba Freight, under its new owner Kenneth Reagan, a new director had been appointed. Some people had begun to suspect Reagan. Something didn't feel right about him. And that suspicion had good reason. Reagan had a very dark past. In the late 90s, he was a notorious criminal, once known by the name Captain Cash, because he always carried a suitcase full of money. All of it was earned through criminal activities. He was involved in money laundering, the supply of fake passports, and drug smuggling. In fact, it was drug smuggling that had landed him in prison in the first place. But just having a criminal past wasn't enough for the police to arrest Reagan. They needed solid evidence. So they began tracking his phone. And that's when they finally got a lead. When Kenneth Reagan's phone was tracked, the police found that on February 13th, both his and Amarjeet's phones were located in the same place. A little later, 2 more phones appeared at the same location. All 4 were traced to a house in Forge Close, which belonged to Reagan's father. Then on February 15th, Reagan's and another person's phone were located near Amarjeet's house. The 2 other people whose phones were tracked were William Hornsey and Peter Rees, both of whom had criminal records. At this point, the police were sure these were their main suspects. The phone tracking data and the presence of 2 additional criminals with Reagan made the police 100% confident that they would find something in Reagan's home. But when police searched his house, they were disappointed. They were hoping for evidence. Instead, what they found was a newly renovated, sparkling clean home. Reagan had completely refurbished the place. Everything from the carpets to the furniture was brand new. The entire house was spotless. Still, Reagan remained on the police radar. And to be honest, it was extremely suspicious that right after Amarjeet disappeared, Reagan completely revamped his house. But at the time, the police had nothing concrete to act on. So they left, empty-handed and frustrated, believing the case might remain unsolved. That is, until Belinda Brown gave them a statement that would break the case wide open. Belinda Brown reported that just days earlier, Reagan and his 2 friends had been digging on her farm. When I pulled into the drive, I couldn't believe it. I saw these 2 guys in my field with a digger. I asked what they were doing, and he said they were building a drainage ditch. As they were leaving, he said, "If the police ask, just tell them I was helping you with your water system." When the police heard that, they knew they had to investigate that area. At Belinda Brown's farm, the police searched the area carefully and found evidence: strands of hair, jewelry, and fabric threads. When tested, the hair was confirmed to belong to Amarjeet, and the jewelry belonged to Nancy. Police had now found their culprits. But one final piece of evidence confirmed everything. While re-examining Amarjeet's body and clothing, police found a letter inside one of his socks. The envelope was addressed to Reagan's house. This meant only one thing: Amarjeet had been at Reagan's house before he died. After weeks of effort, police finally arrested Kenneth Reagan, William Hornsey, and Peter Rees. All 3 of them continued to deny any involvement, but the physical evidence and phone records clearly showed they were responsible for murdering the Chohan family. Since none of them confessed, the police pieced together a theory based on the facts. According to the police theory, on February 13th, Reagan lured Amarjeet to meet fake investors. Waiting there were Rees and Hornsey. The 4 men met at the Forge Close house, where they kidnapped Amarjeet and forced him to sign blank documents, which were later used to fraudulently transfer Seba Freight's ownership to Reagan. On February 15th, Reagan went to the Seba Freight office with those forged documents. Between 15th and February 17th, Amarjeet was murdered. Police also believe that Amarjeet realized he wouldn't survive, and in his final moments, he hid the letter in his sock, hoping it would be discovered and help trace his killer. Then on February 17th, Reagan and Hornsey went to Amarjeet's house and murdered Nancy, her mother Sharonjeet, and the 2 children. The bodies were initially buried at Belinda Brown's farm, but when Reagan suspected that police might search the property, he dug up the bodies and dumped them into the sea. The motive behind this entire conspiracy was Reagan's greed. He wanted to take over Seba Freight and use it as a front for drug trafficking. Yes, this theory makes sense, and it's strongly backed by evidence, including mobile location tracking and witness statements. When the police spoke to people who knew Reagan, they all said the same thing. Reagan was the kind of man who would do anything for money, even kill 2 innocent children. Eventually, Kenneth Reagan and William Hornsey were sentenced to life in prison, while Peter Rees received 23 years, since, according to police, he was only involved in Amarjeet's murder, not the rest of the family. Omkar Varma had always wanted to see his sister living happily with her family. But because of one man's greed, that dream was shattered forever. I was told Nancy's body was decomposed, but I insisted on seeing it. Because for me, it wasn't a skeleton. For me, it was my baby sister. For me, she was still alive. I was talking to her. It was my tearful goodbye. I said, "Nancy, I try my best, but I couldn't save you." 3 members of the Chohan family were found. But to this day, the bodies of the 2 children have never been recovered and may never be. It's truly disgusting what greed can make a man do. And this case is a prime example of the kind of monsters that can exist among us. So even if you're a good person, never trust just anyone blindly. And with that, the case of the Chohan family comes to a close.